Something that has plagued the entire zombie storyline community for a while now has been a slight inconsistency with the comic. The Zombies comic, issue 6. There's a small plot hole. However, I believe that I have an answer to this, something that I really haven't seen anybody think about. And if you have, good job, but I did think of this on my own, so I'm going to give myself credit for this, even though it is entirely possible that somebody else has thought of this. I just haven't seen it online anywhere. Let me know in the comments below if you were thinking the same thing, but I just want to bring this up because I haven't seen it mentioned, and I honestly think some of the big guys are overlooking a pretty big part of this comic. Though I don't even think this plot hole is a very big deal. I mean, understanding what happens here, sure, well, is interesting. I don't even think it changes the storyline that much. Its actual implications are not that big, but I would have liked to finally put this point to rest. So first, let's begin with context. What am I even talking about? Well, in the Zombies comic issue 6, we do see Victus teleport into a place that looks like the house. As shown on screen here, you see Victus teleporting in, and well, that's the house. That's the basement in the house. Very clearly, everything matches. That is fine. But the biggest piece of evidence that makes us know that this is the house is the fact that Richtofen says we should be quiet, the kids are asleep upstairs. So obviously we have to be in the house. Now, it is important to note that I believe this is the first timeline. This is the first time where Victus and Richtofen meet. This is not an iteration of the cycle, meaning the events after it have not occurred yet, which is going to be key later, and I will bring this up again. But I just want to say that first. Nothing has happened yet because we do see Richtofen here reading the Chronorium for the very first time. And I do believe it is the very first time, not a part of the cycle. We can see that in the next part here. Richtofen reads all the timelines and realizes he dies in every one. Now this is when he starts his plan. Because he realizes all the timelines and all the outcomes after the Chronorium tells it to him, he enacts his plan by going to Mob of the Dead. Now also key to note, when Richtofen leaves for Mob of the Dead, he is still in the house. He is teleporting from the house to Mob of the Dead. That is a very key point. At this point, they're still in the house, going to Mob of the Dead. Once he arrives, he states, Alcatraz, always the long way around. He picks up the prisoner's blood vials, and he leaves. He goes to an early part in the timeline that is not confirmed yet, but he goes to an early part in the timeline where he visits his younger self to give himself the Alcatraz blood vials. Then, once he teleports away there, he says, back once more to this cursed prison. I know the rules are different here, perhaps different enough. Now this is where the confusion begins. Richtofen is now shown going down an elevator, and presumably he ends up back at the house. However, in the previous frame, he said, back again to this cursed prison. So he meets up with the Victus crew, which we previously thought was in the house, but now he's in Alcatraz. At this point, the Victus crew steps into the cryostasis pods, and Primus arrives just on time, and the comic ends there. So what is this confusion all about? Well, there's an obvious plot hole. What is going on here? Well, first of all, we start in the house with Victus, and then we end up in Alcatraz with Victus. Now, there could possibly be some weird teleportation going on here and some just convoluted explanations, such as when he teleported to Alcatraz, Victus simultaneously got teleported to Alcatraz as well, which could very well have happened. We don't know. And also, it wouldn't really matter. But what I think is going on is as follows. Remember how I stated earlier that I believe this is the first point in the cycle before anything else has happened, and our characters haven't even been through the cycle at all yet. So presuming that is correct, I believe that all that this is a paradox, and that's just because Richtofen hasn't enacted his plan yet. We know that the cycle's created and the paradox is created because of Richtofen's plan as shown in the comics. He goes to get the blood from the prisoners, he gives the blood to his younger self, he gets the blood from Victus, which then creates the paradox of him coming back to Alcatraz to get the blood, and the two meet, and Primus goes on their journey once again. However, if this truly was the first time that any of these events have happened, the lab wouldn't even be created yet. how would Victus be able to go to the lab in the first place if the lab wasn't created? Because the lab is created because of Richtofen's plan. Before Richtofen reads the Chronorium, the lab was never created. The lab was created because he read the Chronorium, and that's how he enacted his plan. It's so he could keep Victus for a later date and meet the Primus characters, get all the blood, etc. So, where else would Victus meet? Well, it would meet in the house. However, after Richtofen goes through his whole plan, this paradox is created. The lab now exists, and we are able to see the events occur. So, here's what actually happened. Victus meets Richtofen in the house for the first time. After he reads the Chronorium for the first time, he then learns of all of his outcomes. This is the reason he enacts his plan to create the paradox so that he cannot die. After this paradox is created, the lab is built under Alcatraz. But now we are stuck in this cycle. Now that the cycle is created, Victus can now end up in Alcatraz without any plot holes. To further support this theory, in the recent MrRofleWaffles video, he mentioned that he talked to Craig Houston, and Craig Houston said that in the comic there is something missing that should say later, to indicate that there is some sort of passage of time that happens. I believe this frame would have been placed right after Richtofen leaves his younger self after he gave himself the blood vials, and before he reaches Alcatraz, so it would state, when the time will come, the blood will protect you. And then the next frame would say, later, and then, back once more to this cursed prison. I know the rules are different here, perhaps different enough. The rules are different because the cycle is now created. This paradox allows Victus to end up in Alcatraz, and it doesn't really matter at that point. I mean, it didn't really matter in the first place because the story would play out the exact same. People are just getting way too caught up on them being in the house and then being in Alcatraz and implications of them being in the house. The house is just a meeting point in my mind. And the only reason they were there is because there was nowhere else for them to meet. However, once the paradox is created, they're able to come to Alcatraz, into the lab, instead of the house when they meet for the first time. And, I mean, that's as far as it goes. It's pretty clear when Craig Houston says there's even a missing frame that's supposed to show a passage of time. So obviously, if it was placed right after Richtofen gives himself the blood vials, later would indicate that now we are in the cycle, and Victus is now in Alcatraz instead of the house. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you think I'm wrong, feel free to comment down below. I would love to hear your ideas and theories. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.